The scientific method is the way scientists develop and test their theories. The process of observing, asking questions, and seeking answers through tests and experiments isn't unique to any one field of science. In fact, the scientific method is applied broadly in science across many different fields, including the social sciences. The study of parental alienation is an example of one of the areas that social scientists investigate. Scientists sometimes disagree with the conclusions of other scientists. Replication of results and scientific consensus is an important part of the scientific method. Genuine academic debate can help both sides fine-tune their experiments and come to a clearer understanding of the issue they are investigating. People sometimes use misleading tactics to convince the public that there's a lot of disagreement among scientists about an issue when there's actually a consensus of scientists on the topic. They use misinformation, science denial techniques, conspiracy theories, and foster polarization among people in order to discredit science. This is exactly what critics of parental alienation theory have tried to do, and they're wrong. There's considerable consensus among scientists about the existence and long-term effects of parental alienation, how to diagnose it, and treatment options. In 2022, Doctors Jennifer Harman and Richard Warshak published a study about the current scientific status of parental alienation in the prestigious American Psychological Association journal, Developmental Psychology. This study confirmed that parental alienation scholarship meets 3 criteria of a maturing field of scientific inquiry. Number 1, an expanding literature. 2, a shift toward quantitative studies, and 3, a growing body of research that tests theory-generated hypotheses. The study concludes that it's no longer tenable to dismiss the field as lacking in scientific status. You might hear about a new book that was published in 2022 entitled Challenging Parental Alienation: New Directions for Professionals and Parents. The book was edited by Jean Mercer and Margaret Drew. It was published by Routledge, a respected academic publisher. The book argues that parental alienation principles and practices should be avoided by family courts in the best interest of children in custody disputes. The book also claims that this book will be useful reading for lawyers, judges, children's service workers, including social workers, child protection court workers, and mental health professionals involved in child custody decisions. The book attempts through various strategies to convince the reader that there's no scientific consensus about parental alienation. This is false. Mercer and Drew have promoted the ideas in this book at bar associations and on government websites. Mercer even suggests that the book can be used to impeach an expert witness who claims that there's a scientific consensus about parental alienation. An international group of researchers, including Dr. Jennifer Harman of Colorado State University and Dr. William Burnett, Professor Emeritus at Vanderbilt University, carefully reviewed Mercer's book. They discovered that the book contains hundreds of gross mischaracterizations, misinformation, blatant errors, and science denial techniques, and plagiarism. There were also misrepresentations of the current state of peer-reviewed published research, scientific inquiry, and case law support about parental alienation. The errors in the book were so numerous and outrageous that the researchers concluded that they constitute an attempt to mislead mental health professionals, legal professionals, and parents. Since the misinformation contained in this book is likely to cause irreparable harm to children and families, Harman, Burnett, and their colleagues submitted a request to the publisher to immediately withdraw the book from publication. A request for retraction is in no way undemocratic or a form of censorship. On the contrary, Rutledge is a member of COPE, C-O-P-E, Committee on Publication Ethics. COPE's retraction guidelines state that editors should consider retracting a publication if they have clear evidence that the findings are unreliable, either as a result of major error, or as a result of fabrication or falsification. These guidelines are intended to apply primarily to journal articles, but may be applicable to book chapters, abstracts, preprints, and other published documents. An 80-page report was prepared that detailed different types of errors in the book. Hundreds of errors were found. These were not differences of opinion among scientists, but outright misinformation, misquoting, and ignoring relevant data and false citations. 45 international organizations endorsed the report by Harman and Burnett. Misinformation number 1. Authors throughout the book repeatedly state that parental alienation theory assumes that all children who resist contact with a parent were influenced to do so by the alienating parent. Fact. The Mercer book doesn't cite any parental alienation scholar or scientist who's made such a claim. Parental alienation scientists have never suggested in a journal article or book chapter that custody evaluators should assume that all children or every case of contact refusal is caused by an alienating parent. Misinformation number 2. The authors of Challenging Parental Alienation stated repeatedly that there's no scientifically based method for distinguishing parental alienation from estrangement. Fact. There are at least 14 research studies published in peer-reviewed journals that may be used to help distinguish alienation from estrangement. Misinformation number 3. The authors of the chapters in Challenging Parental Alienation repeatedly stated that there's no empirically based treatments for parental alienation. Fact. There's been numerous research reviews and books written on interventions for alienated children and several peer-reviewed scientific outcome studies of interventions for severely alienated children. Misinformation number 4. Page 195, Suzanne Zakor states that a review of the social science literature concludes the research suggests that children don't necessarily benefit from greater contact with their non-custodial parent, and that the research also indicates that children don't fare better post-divorce in joint custody arrangements than they do in sole custody. And some children, including those in high-conflict families, may fare worse. Fact. Zakor's statements about custodial arrangements and child outcomes aren't supported with any empirical evidence, and she fails to mention the significant amount of scientific research on the long-term benefits of shared parenting on children, even where there's parental conflict. Use of extreme overstatements and distorted facts number 1. The authors of the chapters in Challenging Parental Alienation claim that no professional organization supports the reality of parental alienation. Fact. Some of the professional organizations that endorse the reality of parental alienation are the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. Use of extreme overstatements and distorted facts number 2. The authors repeatedly choose to use words that incite emotions of fear and injustice against parental alienation. For instance, on page 26, Doughty and Drew state that language in Cold War propaganda about brainwashing and mind control in communist regimes that had caught the public imagination in the 1950s was appropriated to enliven his idea that some mothers induced false memories and beliefs in their children. On page 196, Zakor states that courts are preventing children from seeing their mothers under the pretext that children need both parents. Fact. These quotes illustrate the use of fear tactics and distortions of fact. There's no empirical support for these claims. False or misleading citation number 1. On page 226, Meyer quotes a research review that there's a lack of clear empirical evidence that children who resist or refuse contact with one of their parents are universally emotionally disturbed or necessarily at risk for long-term negative outcomes, rendering any long-term effects of alienation inconclusive. And she quotes Saini et al., 2016, pages 436 to 437. Fact. This quote doesn't exist in the given citation. False or misleading citation number 2. Page 224. Meyer quotes an article that, most importantly, although the majority of researchers purport to exclude from their studies cases where the abuse of a child had occurred, few have reported working definitions of child abuse and systematic methods for excluding them from their samples. Saini, pages 417 to 418. Fact. The actual statement in the Saini book doesn't contain the words most importantly. Using a computer-based plagiarism search engine, we unearthed the exact quotation, including the words most importantly, that was taken from a PowerPoint presentation from Kuhnle and Drost in 2012, page 18, that's available online, which appears to be Meyer's actual source. Therefore, it appears that Meyer directly quotes Kuhnle and Drost and inaccurately attributes the source to Saini et al., 2016. Conspiracy theories. On page 191, Zakor writes that since their invention, the parental alienation syndrome and parental alienation belief systems have enjoyed increased recognition by the legal system to the point of becoming a significant threat to women's and children's safety and autonomy. Page 195, Zakor writes that courts are preventing children from seeing their mothers under the pretext that children need both parents. On page 243, Meyer writes that parental alienation ideology seems particularly useful for attacking the parental capacity of good mothers. If the mothers were violent or negligent, the father wouldn't need the parental alienation argument to obtain custody of the child. Fact. The language used by the authors across the entire book suggests parental alienation is some kind of anti-feminist conspiracy. Yet there's no data to support this conspiracy theory other than the opinions of the authors. Parental alienation affects men and women, and the gender bias of the book tends to polarize the issue. Science denial techniques number 1, a false consensus. On page 218, Meyer writes that the widespread discrediting of Gardner and parental alienation syndrome and the DSM's rejection of parental alienation disorder, Crary, 2012, Meyer, 2013, should preclude reliance on any alienation expert or construct utilizing the same criteria. Fact. The author of this statement makes it appear that many people have discredited Gardner and parental alienation syndrome, yet her citations are her own opinion article published in 2013 and a popular press article written by Crary, 2012, published for the Associated Press, which isn't a scientifically peer-reviewed publication. Science denial techniques number 2, ad hominem attacks. Page 26. Doughty and Drew state that it was only when Richard Gardner created and marketed parental alienation syndrome as a means of refuting mothers' claims of child abuse that courts began to take notice. There are continuing doubts as to whether he held any academic or research posts during his career. For example, a position he stated he held at Columbia Medical School was a voluntary one and not a professorship. Fact. Doughty and Drew claim that there are doubts about Gardner's academic posts. In fact, Richard Gardner was a clinical professor of child psychiatry at Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons. The comments by Doughty and Drew about continuing doubts are similar to the conspiracy theory that 9/11 was an inside job by the United States government. Page 35. Doughty and Drew write that it is, however, difficult to separate the aggressive determination of current campaigns for parental alienation to be recognized or even criminalized from the financial incentives. Fact: aggressive determination isn't an indication that the reason for the campaigning is financial incentive. There can be many reasons why a researcher can be very proactive for a cause without financial motivations. These are just a few of the hundreds of such errors that are in the book Challenging Parental Alienation. The potential harm to children from these errors prompted an international team to request from the publisher to recall the book from circulation. Mercer suggests that the book Challenging Parental Alienation can be used to impeach an expert witness who claims that there's scientific consensus about parental alienation. Actually, there'd be no better way to discredit the critics of parental alienation than by presenting this book in court. Once a court is shown a comprehensive review of misinformation and other inaccuracies in Challenging Parental Alienation, New Directions for Professionals and Parents, the court will no doubt realize the deceit that the critics of parental alienation are perpetrating. In truth, these types of errors and misinformation aren't unique to the book Challenging Parental Alienation. The writings of parental alienation critics, domestic violence websites, social media posts, and the news media are filled with distortions about parental alienation. It's even more concerning that these critics are aggressively promoting this distortion of science in state and federal legislation. They're attempting to persuade state legislatures to pass laws to discredit the science of parental alienation. This is not a phenomenon that's unique to the United States. Rather, parental alienation critics are actively promoting these misrepresentations in many countries and also at the United Nations. The defenders of science and the welfare of children can't passively sit back and allow this perversion of justice to continue. You now understand the types of misinformation and techniques that are being used by parental alienation critics to spread their distortions of science. It's time for every individual to correct such misinformation wherever it appears. Challenge social media posts that spread such misinformation. Write letters of correction to the editors when it appears in publications. Most important, let your legislators know when proposed laws are based on such misinformation and inform them of the truth. And of course, comment, like, and share this video everywhere. A little light can illuminate a lot of darkness. Your voice does make a difference. For the sake of our children, make your voice heard now. Written by members of the Parental Alienation Study Group and produced by the Law Center, creator of the Family Court Custody Boot Camp. Click the link in the description portion of this video to learn more about them.